Hi, welcome to another weekly episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. My name is Bridget Burns. I'm your host, the Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, I partner with a journalist to have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor to understand what it's like to navigate this moment, learn what their perspective is, and hopefully to inspire you in the week ahead. So that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
This week, we're really excited to bring you a conversation with the president of Dillard University, Walter M. Kimbrough. He's been recognized for his research and writings on historically Black colleges and African-American men in college. He's also emerged as one of the leaders discussing free speech on college campuses pretty straightforwardly, which is how he does everything. He's also got one of the most vibrant and thoughtful presences of any college leader and highlighted in his book, Follow the Leader, Lessons in Social Media Success from Higher Ed CEOs. Walter, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's such an honor to have you. I feel like I've been a fan following for years. I've seen you back in the world when we used to be in person. I saw you at events from afar, but just so delighted to have you on here and know that obviously social media is a very comfortable space for you. So for our audience at home, we are taking questions live and comments. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So the first thing we want to do is just get a sense of, how are you holding up right now? Can you give us a sense of your perspective in this moment? Are you in person, you're remote? What's going on for you so that we can dive into the conversation?
Right. So we have been in a hybrid form all throughout the year, more classes in person this semester than last. And part of that was just based on feedback from the students. So even in the beginning, when we decided that we would be hybrid in the fall, we participated in a broader study that was done by UNCF. And we found that 85% of our students said they wanted some kind of in-person experience. And so I did my own focus groups with some staff, with faculty, with students, and with some parents. And even parents, some who had comorbidities, said, I saw how my child progressed being there in person. They need that experience. So even though it wasn't optimal with the distancing and everybody had their own single, even though I think people probably still like that, wearing a mask, and your class would meet maybe one day a week instead of 2 days a week. We got through that, and then we've opened up a little bit more to have more classes that are in person. So we tried to make the best out of the situation as possible. I mean, it hasn't been optimal, but at this point in time now, I really do see that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel when you keep watching the data. And I'm checking the New Orleans Health Department stats every week to say, well, what's it looking like? Is it, what's the virus rate transmission and how many people are being vaccinated? So you see those things that are happening. And you sort of get excited to say, I think we're about to get out of this. So I'm hopeful.
What's your sense of the students' perception of their experience being on the campus? Since we know it's constricted and different, what are the primary things you believe they're getting out of it that made them want it and are making them appreciate it?
Well, for some of our students, and as we did our survey last summer, particularly with our population, it really brought home the fact to me that people laugh at me when I call it this. There's the famous singer Luther Vandross had a song called "A House Is Not a Home," and so I call it the "House Is Not a Home" theory, where some places where students live in, they're just like, I'd rather be at Dillard in New Orleans with the pandemic than to be at home. Mm-hmm. And that really wasn't their home. It was just a house that they lived in. And so this became their home. And so they really wanted to be here. So that drove a lot of what I was hearing from students to say, this is still better than, what I would be experiencing. Like I said, it's not optimal. There's going to be students who didn't have the traditional college experience, and they've tried. I mean, we did some things with our coronation for our, queen and our king. We did that a little differently. And, our theater department did their play a little differently. So we're creating some things as we go along. We did a virtual commencement last spring that I thought went well. So those things, but I think that for me, the virus is even more insidious for an HBCU in the South, in a place like New Orleans, where you're talking about social distancing, and people in New Orleans, not only do they run up and hug each other, they kiss too. So it's like you take away all the sprints of people who like to hug each other and do all of that. And even on our campus, people run up and hug on each other. So that, I think that made it for a lot of people even more challenging, because it sort of stripped us of our humanity and what I think we do best.
But it's interesting because we ran a story I guess it would have been last fall, about the fact that HBCUs in general seem to be doing kind of better at controlling the pandemic than certain other groups of institutions. And it's partly, it may be what you were talking about before, students really buying into the idea that being on campus was important, in part maybe to get to not be where they would have been otherwise. But and it was just fascinating to me, and it made a certain amount of sense, but it still kind of surprised me just that.
Well, we had a lot of leadership from our seniors who wanted to have the hope that they would be able to have an in-person commencement. We had a student who in Nashville, from Nashville, was out last summer, hanging out at a club, got sick, got her dad sick. So she became this poster child. She did a podcast for us. She was on a task force with the mayor of Nashville. So we had a press conference about it. And she's the college student saying, this is my experience, don't do that. So we had a lot of people where you didn't have to have the mask police. And on our campus, it wasn't a political statement whether or not you wore a mask. Because when you're, 95% African-American, somebody who has been sick and probably even died. So you realize this is a real thing. It's nothing to play with. So I think that helped us too. All of those factors, that we had a lot of buy-in and people tried to do their best.
I totally see that. I also, would be such a privilege to be on campus, and at HBCUs in particular, where the culture in person, the interaction, the community is such a huge value point that that totally makes sense. I wanted to see, I'm hearing some rumblings from college leaders about their concerns about fall of 21. We're starting to see numbers coming out, and, but it does seem like the concern level and how people are looking at this really varies by institution, by type, all that. And so I'm just wondering, can you give us a sense of your headspace about fall of 21, anything that you're seeing at Dillard, so we could have a sense of that?
Right. So right now, in terms of our total number of applications, and we usually get a ton of applications, those are down, I would say, significantly. And the main reason is that, once again, in terms of the personality of the people who are at Dillard, our recruiters are out. They go to the traditional fairs where there are lots of students that are there. So they get lots of applications. And so the conversation we're having now is that even though we had lots and lots of applications, our deposits are right where they were last year. So having fewer applications has not meant anything in terms of students who've already committed to be here for next year. So we're still on track in terms of, making our class, which I think is really good. And so we're really trying to figure out now in terms of, are we deploying our people resources in the right places with the right students and families who want to be here. So that's a part of it. But, the thing that I've been predicting that we're starting to see now is that I think the cycle is going to be just delayed this year, and you're going to have more people really starting to apply now and all throughout the summer, because they'll realize things are opening back up. And I just don't know how many, 17 to 18-year-olds, and we really have a very traditional student age population, are going to want to be at home when they have a chance to go to school. And we saw that this fall, where I was just surprised, a number of students and parents during the height of the pandemic that packed up that car and drove across the country to come to experience college. They still wanted that. So, if you're in a situation where the virus rate is really low and, 60% of the country is vaccinated, I don't see why people wouldn't come to college. They're not going to want to be at home. And I don't think the job prospects are going to be great at home either. So I think those numbers I think it's just going to be a different work cycle for everybody on campus. I think this summer will be busier as people realize, like, things are opening up. I'm not going to be at home anymore. Let me get out of here. And I think as parents say, get out the house too. So I think that all of those things working together, but we'll have to see. I think I'm probably more concerned that still there will be families that have not recovered financially and are unable to come to school because of that, and not because of the virus. So we'll have to see. This is, like last fall, we didn't know what to really expect. our freshman class was, or our overall enrollment was 1% less than the previous year. That was a win for us. So I don't know what this fall is going to look like. We'll just sort of see and evaluate as we go along.
Well, actually, one last question on the pandemic, maybe before we and the situation we're in now. Have you what's your sense been from your student body, your prospective students, their families, your staff about we've read some about the reluctance of African Americans to get vaccinated. And, we had one of your colleagues on a few weeks ago talking about his very prominent vaccination getting to try and encourage members of his community that it's safe, et cetera. But how are you viewing that, and what are you doing about it?
Well, I still have scars on my body from last fall. So last September 2nd, the president of Xavier of Louisiana and I sent letters to our campuses saying, we're in the vaccine trial. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's a 50% chance that you would get the vaccine or you get the placebo. As it turned out, he got the vaccine, I got the placebo. So we sent it out saying, look, the research says that African Americans are underrepresented in these studies and we need to be a part of it. So this is something we hope you all will consider. And we didn't discriminate against anybody, students, faculty, staff, alums, where there was a lot of blowback and people saying, oh, you're forcing the students and you must be getting paid to do. And I'm like, I just sent out one letter and that was it. I didn't say anything else to anybody unless they asked me about but it was, you had people commenting on social media, people I didn't know. They were just like, oh, this is horrible. They kept talking about Tuskegee, and half of the time they got Tuskegee wrong because they kept saying they injected them with syphilis, which did not happen. So it was, we just got beat up. And I kept telling people, I am not a scientist, even though I went to a math and science magnet high school in Atlanta and my undergrad degree is in biology. But Dr. Verrett at Xavier is a real immunologist with degrees from MIT at Columbia and studied at Yale. He knows what he's talking about. So, and I talked to a ton of doctors before we were involved in this. So to me, it's funny now because I see, some of my colleagues and they're rolling up the sleeves and people are just like, oh, such bravery. And I'm just like, where the hell were all of y'all back when I was getting beat up? I got dragged for months over this. I'm on all these shows trying to defend why I'm participating in a vaccine trial. And I'm like, there are vaccines that are developed all the time. I told people when I was a kid, I got chickenpox. I remember that. My kids will never get chickenpox because between those times, a vaccine was developed. And your kids get the vaccine for chickenpox and you don't say a word about it. So stop. So I'm just at the point where I'm like sick of this. I don't want people to talk. It's like, go on and get the vaccine. You need the vaccine. Your kids will have a dozen vaccines before they go to school and you won't say a word about it because the school is going to say, either you homeschool them or they get vaccines and nobody pushes back. So stop pushing back now. Let's get the vaccine and let's move on. But I'm just sick of people now, just heroes. They're just clapping like, oh, there's something. And I'm just like, I can't believe this. This is crazy.
They really did you dirty on that one. It's not fair. Yeah. But so I am curious. So I actually had signed up, but didn't get picked to be part of one of the trials. You're the first person I've met who has. Are you actually getting it as a result? Like, are you moving ahead because you were willing to kind of put yourself out there?
Yeah. So what happened? So here in the state of Louisiana, they partnered schools with Tulane and LSU, and Dillard was partnered with LSU first to get vaccines for our nursing faculty and our nursing students. And then they offered opportunities for faculty and staff. So, I didn't meet the criteria, but they had a way to vaccinate more of us. So as soon as that happened, I could go back to Oxnard Health Services. And I was a part of the Pfizer trial to say, okay, you can unblind me now because I have an opportunity to get the vaccine. And because I was in the trial, they had vaccine reserved for me. So I think I got my second injection maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm fully vaccinated now. It's probably 3 weeks.
Congrats.
Ago.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations. Well, we can, I actually want to take from that and head in the direction of social media because, and I know that people always want to, talk to you about how do you dare to be so different on social media? How do you dare to show up as a real human being instead of a cardboard cutout of a college president? I'm more interested, what's that been like in terms of you actually trying to help nudge the sector to be more conversational? We want to better connect with students and with the broader, community. And I think that the way that you have modeled how to show up as a real person who is, you're willing to, for folks who are watching, President Kimbrough has been the most laid back and coolest guest as far as prep. Like he was like, yeah, I don't even need to know anything happening in advance. I'll just roll with it. And that kind of comfort level, I think, comes because you have spent so much time being yourself on social media. And so you're not flappable. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us kind of, I assume there's a lot of good things that have come out of it, but what is your most favorite and what has been the downside? It sounds like the vaccine gave you a sense of that, but I hope you haven't been trolled too much. We just want to get a sense of that.
Yeah, well, so social media is a very public place, and anybody can comment, folks that you know, folks you don't know. So, I mean, you can do something great and you get lots of likes and retweets. That's good. And if somebody doesn't like anything, 5 years ago, we hosted a Senate debate, and some kind of way David Duke made the debate. And, they wanted me to cancel it. And I was like, we just rented out the space. I am not trying to break a contract because our contract doesn't allow us just to say, I don't like this guy and you can't have this event. We contracted and they selected. We had nothing to do with that. So then you get dragged. So it's like, those are the times you're just like, I'm not going to look at my mentions because there's just a lot of foolishness out there and I'm not going to take it personally. And if it's somebody who really knows me, who has an issue with me, then they can talk to me face to face. I'm not afraid. So if you got an issue with me, you need to come see me directly. But if you just do it on social media, then I'm just like you scared. And that doesn't bother me. I mean, if we're going to have a confrontation, I'm old school. Let's have a confrontation and let's go face to face. But you just sending something on Twitter, and I mean, it goes for anybody too. Sometimes students will get upset about something. They want you to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, you guys have so much access to me. And I always tell our students, if you send me an email and I don't respond in 24 hours, it's usually much less than that. But if I don't respond in 24 hours, it means I'm dead, or you need to call Liam Neeson because I have been taken. That's all I can say. So you need to find. So if you got an issue, send me a note to say, hey, I got an issue with this. Can you explain it? That's fine. So I've been reading some things because social media can be a mean place, which is why it is interesting now because, I grew up United Methodist. My father's a United Methodist minister. So we're in Lent. And every year during Lent, I give up social media. I post on Sundays. I don't read anything. So anybody who's commenting on this, I won't see it at all. So I give it up because for me, it's sort of like I need that cleansing because there's a lot of good and a lot of ways to connect. And that's the thing I like about it, that I've been able to use social media to connect, to bring people together, to open up opportunities for our students, to share. I try to use it very positively. When I hear good news, I like to brag on people. I think that's a part of my job. So I use it for that to say, how can we inject more positivity? How can we share important information on that as well? So that's the way I like to use it. And so that on Sundays, I just post a lot of things. I mean, yesterday, it's things that are happening on campus. And then my son was in a basketball tournament. So I posted pictures from that. So you get the full range of things. But I think for me, I've had ease with it because when I became a president in 2004, that's when Facebook began. So my entire presidency, I've sort of grown as a president as social media evolved. So you go from there to Twitter to Instagram, all these different platforms. So I had a chance to sort of experiment with them along the way as they were developing. And so for me, that's a part of my comfort level. But anybody who's become a president, in the last 16, 17 years now should have some level of comfort because they have entered a presidency that has always had social media. When I first started, I could see more reticence from presidents because this is something completely new. And I did presentations at like CIC to talk about it. But now somebody coming in and sort of being reticent, it's like, well, it's been around a long time now. So you need to sort of get over that. And as I tell presidents too, even if you're not on social media, you're on social media. That means people aren't talking about you. They just use your name. They can't tag you, but you're still on social media. So don't act like you're not there. You're there.
I'm glad that you actually have spoken about this. I was like, yeah, I hope AC has tapped you to be the one leading any modules for new presidents or Harvard on social media engagement, just because you are kind of like the one who's the most experienced with it.
We've seen in the enrollment data that we've seen sort of in the pandemic era, we've seen Black men, Black students generally sort of among those affected the most in terms of having their academic plans waylaid. And that's obviously concerning because it seemed pre-pandemic that that higher ed was starting to make some headway on equity issues, I would say a little more than had been the case previously. And I'm curious whether sort of how you feel, again, if there's a light at the end of the tunnel, how that looks over the next year, whether the momentum will be restored. And I'm also particularly interested in your sense of what predominantly white institutions can be doing to better serve that population. And I don't know what happened, what you do when you get asked by colleagues of predominantly white institutions, but interested in your thoughts about what institutions that don't serve that population primarily or heavily can do to do better.
Yeah, so there are two ways I think about it. Particularly from the HBCU space, there have been people who have said, oh, enrollment is dropping, and just sort of raises red flag. And so I went deeper into the numbers and realized that was the tip of the iceberg. The real drop has been in the number of African-American students going to college. And I think I read something maybe within the last year that talked about that's pretty significant. And people weren't talking about that. And actually HBCUs were faring better than African-American students overall. So there is a bigger picture going on here that Black students are not going to college. And I'm not hearing enough of the bells being rung to say, what is happening with that? So you have fewer that are going. I'm worried that that's going to be exasperated when you start hearing these horror stories about kids in some of these urban and even rural school districts that have sort of done online, but it really hasn't been good and they're not logging in. I mean, there have been a ton of those stories. So that's the crisis that's coming on top of the one that we already have. And so now institutions have to figure out how then do we create these communities that are responsive to all students, and particularly for African-American students. And so there's going to have to be some intentional conversations about what are we doing as an institution? Does our institution reflect our student body? Because I think a lot of people aren't even dealing with that issue. It's sort of like the people in leadership who are giving the same kinds of arguments don't look like the students. And so you're having this conflict that, they aren't teaching the students in the classroom. They aren't the administrators. So I think there are some things that can be learned from HBCUs. I think part of the concern that I have, because people are worried about the competition for students, that there probably really should be a competition for faculty, staff, and administrators to really say, we're going to have an institution that looks like our student body. And they're going to have to really start trying to tap some of those people in those roles to serve at some of these other institutions. I think that's got to be part of it, because it's different when you have somebody, like Old Dominion just got their first African-American president. Brian, I've known him for years. I used to work at Old Dominion. Brian's worldview, he's an HBCU graduate. He's able then to have conversations that Old Dominion hasn't had before. And it's not to say anything bad about their previous presidents. The current president, John, was there when I worked there. I know Dr. Cook when he was there before. So they've had good people, but based on your experiences, there are certain things that come to mind that are, more of an issue for you that you pay attention to. And so I think that they'll be able to benefit as a diverse institution to have someone with his background. I think we have to see more of those kinds of things that are happening to really address some of the issues, because if it's not part of your lived experience, sometimes you could be a special person that really dives in, but those persons, I believe, have been few and far between.
That's really helpful. And I will definitely be following up with you on, because as trying to coach and guide predominantly white institutions, this has definitely been a struggle in terms of, we're very comfortable focusing on our quantitative data and the quantitative, how, retention, graduate, all these things. But the real shift has to be qualitative in terms of really how do we take in input and feedback from students, and how do you weight it against some of that quantitative data so that you can actually figure out what kind of cultural changes need to happen on your campus. And I just think PWIs are really struggling with that right now. And I hope they continue to focus on this rather than just giving up because it's hard.
Right, exactly. I was thinking, I saw recently the new president of Ohio State made a commitment that says that they feel like their retention efforts with African American students are being harmed because they don't have enough African American faculty. So she's identified to say, we're going after, I can't remember the number, X number of African American faculty. So they saw that as a reason for a retention issue. And it's got to be those kinds of things that people are doing to say, we feel like this too is a retention issue. The students don't have the right mentors and those kinds of things. So we're going to, go after people. I think that's part of the strategy.
I think that's great. Yeah, President Johnson, I've been really impressed with her rhetoric, and a lot of the initiatives that are coming out. And I think we need to see more models of what white leaders of institutions do, and not just assuming that a lot of the work needs to be done by any other community. Like, we need to model that this is how you be a great ally and you be a leader ally. So obviously we are in violent disagreement, violent agreement, I mean. So I did want to shift to just you as a leader. I know that you have been a president for quite some time, and you've been a mentor to many. And I'm just wondering if you can share with us what advice you most frequently give when, say, I'm a new president. I just found out I got the gig, and I call you. What is the advice that you most frequently offer?
For new presidents, one of the things I do is I suggest that people come in and become a student of the institution. And you spend time really learning about the history, the traditions, and the people there. So I was at Philander Smith 7.5 years before I came to Dillard. I've been here almost 9. And when I got here, I was like, look, I know how to be a president. I've been a president of a church-related HBCU in an urban setting for 7.5 years. I don't know Dillard well. So, like I did at Philander, I spent time in the archives. That was just, to me, it's always interesting just to sort of get a sense of the history from the old pictures and stories that were written. So that's always a part of my my preparation. And then I offered 30-minute meetings to anybody on campus who wanted them, just to sort of, and I had like a few basic questions, but to hear about those people and their stories, who they were, who are your people, how long have you been here, what, if you were me, what would you advise me to do first, and those kinds of things. And when I got here, I talked to 200 people. So I spent a lot of time in my first 6 months just talking to people, trying to figure out who we are as an institution. So, those things I think help you have a better sense, and for people to connect with you, to find out about who you are and that kind of thing. So that once you've done that, I think then you have a firm foundation in to say, all right, based on what I'm hearing and the kinds of things, these are some things I think we should look at. I think also too, I think Ron Heifetz at Harvard talks about this idea of leadership being able to interrogate reality. And that's the tough part, because you can come into a new place and people say, oh, we got, this is great, this is great, this is great. And you got to come and ask the questions like, well, how do you know it's great? Everybody says something is great. I always tell our folks here, what are the external validators? It's great for you to say that you're great, but does your major national association for whatever this is, have they given you any kind of recognition that you're great? Because I just can't go on. You're saying it's good that you have high self-esteem, but what kind of external validations do you have? And so we start talking about those kinds of things so we can have a realistic understanding of this is where we are. We think it's solid, but how do we get it to another level? So let's push that way. So I think that's a big part of it too. But I think it starts with coming in and saying, I don't know this place. Let me come in. Let me learn about the history. Let me learn about the people. Let me learn about the community. Let me be a part of the community and get engaged. I think that's a part of how you should start.
That is perfect advice, and I hope folks listen to it. President Kimbrough, this has been a real pleasure for us. Thank you so much for being the coolest president on the internet, and also just being so accessible. And for folks at home, if you want to connect, as you heard, it's at Hip Hop Prez. Is there anything else you would direct folks to if they wanted to connect with you, President Kimbrough?
No, all of my social media, I'm active: Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and it's either at Hip Hop Prez or just my name. So you can find me there. But once again, I really won't be active until after Easter. So I got 3 more weeks.
All right. Well, only positive shout outs and high fives on the internet. If you want to, talk trash and add somebody else. So, well, thanks so much. And Doug, as always, for being an excellent co-host, and we will see you all next week. Have a great day.